What's going on, everybody? Welcome into Pack a Day Happy Hour. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Appreciate you guys being here. I know it's a little bit of a weird time today at 1:30 p.m. Central Time. Not probably the ideal hour for a happy hour, but hopefully you are maybe at least at East Coast time where you're at 2:30 at least. But had to go a little bit earlier today. Got some stuff going on this afternoon. Should be here for about 50 to 55 minutes, and we'll try to get to as many questions as you guys have. We'll jump into everything right away. So let's get freaking started. We did just learn, by the way, that as of now, all three practices next week for minicamp are set to be open to the media, which is a pleasant surprise. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 10:30 a.m. I'll be covering it all 3 days. However, I would still expect that on Thursday, it's going to be a team building activity. Usually that last day of minicamp is something where they end up canceling it and going bowling or whatever the case may be. So my guess is we don't get a Thursday practice. The only thing that would give me some hesitation on that is they did allow the team to have that extra week off and not have that extra week of OTAs. So maybe the trade-off for that was that they're actually going to do all three minicamp practices. So we'll wait and see. But for now, all three set to be open to the media. So it should be lots of practice time next week. But my guess is still Tuesday, Wednesday only. And then they cancel for a team, whatever team building activity on Thursday. But I'll keep you guys posted as we know a little bit more on that. We'll start off with Mike. Happy Friday, Andy. Great episode today. Perhaps one of my favorites since being a member. I believe Dobbs may end up in Pittsburgh with Lazard. Also found it great timing that this drops game one of the finals. Aaron wanted to be a Viking to stick it to the Packers. I'm not sure I agree on that. Bears and Lions twice, plus the Cowboys would have been on the schedule too. I imagine he's just as happy to start Aaron Glenn's career 0-1 now. During today's video, you mentioned athletes falling off. The only one who is undefeated against Father Time is LeBron James, who is now timeless. I believe Aaron pretty good this season if healthy. I would put Brady definitely on that list as well. Last comment, Aaron wants to pass Favre in touchdowns and beating the Packers would add him to Brady, Breeze, Manning, and Favre as the only players to beat all 32 teams. Definitely company he wants to be in for sure. He's got a lot of, probably something I should have discussed a little bit today on the show as well, but he's got a lot of records that he can attain. I talked about beating all 32 teams, but touchdown, not like the all-time leader, but can certainly get higher on the list in touchdowns, in wins, in all of those kind of key categories, yards, etc. So he definitely has some things to play for there as well. I do believe that he had interest in going to the Vikings. I think it was more of just, it was a really great situation than anything else, but you never quite know. And I appreciate the kind words on today's episode, Mike McGee. And thank you so much for being a member. Omer, I should say, in my honest opinion, there are 7 key games on the Packers schedule against teams in the upper echelon of the league. Teams the Packers couldn't beat last season. The Lions, Vikings top that list, 0-4, Eagles 0-2, plus Commanders, Ravens, 7 elite teams. The Packers must come away with at least a 4-3 record to make me think they are a legitimate contender. Rest of the schedule, they are favored and expected to win. They're going to have to face the Eagles most likely again if they expect to be playing in Inglewood, California in February. I think it's a little bit too early to know for sure which teams are going to be good. We would have sat here at this time a year ago and said those Dolphins and 49ers games in late November, early December, whatever they were in, were probably going to be extremely important games for Green Bay. And they just weren't. They were basically cakewalk games against teams that the Dolphins were a shell of themselves and the 49ers had a billion injuries and were starting Brandon Allen, if I remember correctly, at quarterback. They weren't tough competition at all. I do believe and agree with your point overall that when they do have tough opponents, whatever that might end up being on the schedule, whether it ends up being Chicago, Minnesota, Detroit, Philly, Baltimore, whomever, they're going to have to show better this season than they did last year. They obviously can't go 0 everything against teams with good records or just when you're in those big games. It's time to grow up. It's time to win those big boy games. And I think it's hopefully going to be a situation where they're going to be, I don't even know if I want to say better prepared, but just more experienced in those big game fights. So that's definitely something that they're going to need to do. And to your point, they are going to have to do it come playoff time, regardless of what the playoff draw is, whether it's at home or on the road. They're going to have to go through a tough gauntlet come the playoffs. And if they want to be prepared for that, you would like to see them show some proof of concept through the course of the regular season. All right, John, if you as a GM had an oracle so that you could know after the draft each year which undrafted free agents would be the best players, how big of an advantage would that be? Enough to win the Super Bowl? It's a good question. If you just kind of like Wikipedia always actually does a really great job of this. So I just took a random one. 2022 NFL draft. I believe you can find this pretty easily. Let's see here. Notable undrafted players. So I just took the 2022 undrafted free agent list. Some noteworthy ones on here: Brandon Aubrey, the kicker for the Cowboys. Jake Sanborn's had a solid career for the Bears. Marquise Bell has been solid for the Cowboys. Dallas Flowers is okay, or was okay, for Indianapolis. I think he's now an Eagle, if I remember correctly. He is a 49er. My apologies. Rasheed Shaheed, the wide receiver for the Saints. That would be a huge one. Daniel Whalen for the Packers, of course. Yeah, so I mean, those players help you, no question at all. Like Rasheed Shaheed would probably be the big one, and then having one of the best kickers in all of football. So that would have helped. Let's take a look at just 2023, or let's take a look at 2021. We'll go backwards. So 2021's undrafted free agents, or notable undrafted ones. Ryan Newsel, the guard center for Atlanta, would have provided good depth along the offensive line. Zane Anderson there for the Chiefs, now obviously a Green Bay Packer. Alaric Jackson for the Rams, is starting offensive tackle. That's probably the best one on that list. Jerry Jacobs, the defensive back for the Lions, has been solid. That's about Darius Washington, who now is out, I think, injured with a serious injury this season for the Ravens, but he had been good. There's a couple on there. It would certainly help. Don't make any questions about that. It would definitely help. I'm not sure that in and of itself would get you over the hump, but it certainly would not hurt. And if you get those years where you get, a big time undrafted free agent here or there that really changes things for you, that could go a long way. But more often than not, you're not finding, at least lately, at least in those two drafts we just went over, not a ton of diamonds in the rough in that situation. Goody isn't going to trade Rasheed Walker, but still likely to get a comp pick. What kind of contract will he likely get if A, he starts all year and plays well as last year, B, plays and takes a step down, and then C, he rotates with Morgan and plays roughly as well as last year? Morgan wins the job and Walker only plays a few snaps as a swing tackle. And what does that mean for comp picks? Comp picks are really difficult to discuss with this next free agent group because the Packers have a lot of free agents. You can only get up to 4, and it also depends on what they do in free agency themselves. So they could re-sign some of these guys. It could end up being where Zach Tom and Romeo Doubs and Rasheed Walker and some other player, whoever, Quay Walker, all end up leaving. I don't think that's going to be the case, by the way, but all get massive contracts, and then everyone else doesn't really account in that comp pick formula unless Green Bay signs their own free agent. So it gets very complicated with depending on what players, again, Green Bay actually lets walk and which ones sign big deals. And then again, which ones Green Bay resigns, and then if Green Bay does any free agency shopping of their own. So that's all going to be a little bit complicated to try to figure out exactly what kind of comp picks that they're in line for. As far as Rasheed Walker's contract, I mean, Dan Moore is the one that immediately comes to mind. Got the big contract this offseason, coming over from Pittsburgh and going to the Titans. To me, Rasheed Walker is just a better player than Dan Moore. And if you look at what Dan Moore got in his contract, he got 4 years, $82 million. I mean, you're talking over $20 million per year for a solid offensive tackle. There are other ones out there that you could maybe, if you go at like the, let's see here. I think I can pull this up pretty quick. Yeah, Jalen Moore would be the other one. So I think on the high end, he probably gets closer to that, that first contract that we discussed with Dan Moore, where he got 4 years, $82 million. That's probably the ceiling. Jalen Moore would be the other one who came over from the 49ers, who barely started, only got time because really like the Trent Williams injury. And he got 2 years, $30 million, $15 million per year. So you're looking at 15 to 20 million per year for Rasheed Walker, in my opinion. And I think he could be better than both of those players. So maybe he can get a little bit more, but if he plays well, he's probably looking 20, 21, 22 million. If he plays okay or just doesn't get that opportunity, he's still probably looking at 15 million per year. And that definitely could, equate into what he gets for a comp pick, and whether it's like a third, a fourth, or a fifth. I think 20 some million is around a fourth. 15 is, I think, around a fifth, but I'd have to go look at that a little bit closer. Chicken, good to see you. Would you do a video in the dead part of the offseason for the floor and ceiling for every starter's 2025 stats? Maybe. I do think sometimes the statistical episodes, when you're just rattling off numbers over and over and over, are not necessarily the best when it comes to whether it's video or audio. It's something I would think about for sure. It's also just kind of tough to predict that stuff sometimes. But if you're doing floor and ceiling, it at least gives you a little bit of wiggle room. I like the idea overall, Chicken. I don't know if I'll get to it, but it's not the worst idea in the world, and I'll definitely put it in the book of things that we could discuss in the dead of the off season for sure. John likes the idea too. If you could have chose an Aaron Rodgers destination this year, what team would you have chose? Vikings, Steelers, Packers, or somebody else? I think all things considered, this was about the best case scenario. I don't want him in Minnesota. It certainly sells drama and it adds to the intrigue, but I kind of want to see, just quite frankly, what JJ McCarthy can do. I think it makes the division interesting in and of itself. And I really don't want to see him in purple. I think that is just a bridge too far. I don't think there's really any other team that made a ton of sense. And I think with Pittsburgh, you kind of get the best of all worlds. It gives him a legitimate chance to go out and compete. I don't think that that's a Super Bowl roster. Now, if Rodgers goes out and tears it up and has one of his MVP seasons all of a sudden, sure, they're definitely going to be in the conversation. But I think at least they're competitive, if nothing else. So I think that's good and good for him and good for football. You get Packers Steelers. You get Aaron Rodgers versus the Packers. So if you want that drama, if you want that smoke, it's out there for you. That's great. He also plays the rest of the division, including the Bears, which is, of course, a fun little side quest of him with the I still own you and Steelers versus Bears. They've got plenty of primetime games. And I just think like that's the best of all worlds. If you're a Aaron Rodgers fan, you can still mostly cheer for the Steelers through a good chunk of the season, other than that game against Green Bay. And if you're not a fan of Aaron Rodgers, well, you're going to get to cheer against him on primetime a decent amount, and you get to cheer against him big time when he's going against the Packers. So I think this is about the best case scenario. And I do think it just adds a level of intrigue too, when you have Mike Tomlin, who just does not have losing seasons. Does that continue? And if he doesn't, like, what does that mean for Aaron? And of course you don't necessarily want Aaron's legacy to end with what happened in New York. So he has an opportunity to kind of rewrite that. I'm interested in all of it. I think this is, again, about as perfect as you could ask for, regardless of what side that you are on. May need to incorporate grades for some players. The stats aren't all that encompassing. For LVN, yes, we want to see the sacks, but I would love to see just more pressures and disruption. Dan Moore was last in sacks allowed and almost last in pressures allowed. If Rasheed is healthy, his floor should be about 20.5 million. Moore was fourth in snaps played, so availability is a big factor. For sure, absolutely talked about that. Just wonder if he doesn't play at all, if teams will think he can't play. Again, I would go to Jalen Moore in that situation. So I think he still gets about 15 million in that scenario. What does the Jordan Morgan situation look like for playing left tackle between Sean Ryan and Rasheed Walker? Who's better? Because if Morgan takes one spot, the other is out. Yeah, I think this in general is going to be what is probably one of the more interesting and just biggest conversations when it comes to training camp coming up is, what does that offensive line battle look like? Who is starting where? Who's playing where? And then does Anthony Belton get involved in that as well? I think it's way too early to say like anything that the Packers, there's 0% chance that the Packers drafted Anthony Belton because they were upset with Jordan Morgan or didn't like the pick or anything like that. Nothing to do with that. This is a player who was set to be a starter last year until he had all the injuries and was already rotating in with the starters and played mostly fine, a little bit below average maybe, but for a rookie player, that's to be expected. I was overall mostly encouraged by what I saw, with a couple of hiccups here and there. To me, it just is more... I look at it more as like the Rashawn Gary situation when he came in his first couple of years. It wasn't necessarily that Gary couldn't come in and play or that he was a bust of a first round pick his first 2 years. It was just, he was behind Zadarius Smith and Preston Smith. There was only so much opportunity for him to go out there and play. We know, like, we still to some extent have to get through our heads of how Green Bay operates. They are going to take good players, regardless of what they feel is good players, regardless of what the depth chart looks like, and they'll figure out the rest later. I don't think Green Bay cares if Rasheed Walker and Sean Ryan just step up and are the stars, and there's not a starting spot for Jordan Morgan in his first 2 years. But next year, when a couple of those guys leave, if he's ready to come in and be a legitimate starter at left tackle, right guard, wherever they want to put him, I don't think they're going to look at that as a failed draft pick for the first 2 years. I think they're going to look at it as, hey, he had 2 years to acclimate, get ready. And now in that third year, when Green Bay really needed him, he's going to be ready to go as a starter. And that is a very valuable commodity in and of itself. So I don't look at it as like this, any sort of, even if he doesn't beat out Sean Ryan and Rasheed Walker this year, that it's some sort of just god-awful sign. I think next year is really going to be the year for Morgan. And let's even be clearer than that. I think this year, there's going to be injuries at some point. Morgan's going to get on the field, whether it's as a rotational player, whether it's as a starter, whether it's due to injuries at some point where he's got to come in and play a ton. He's going to play this year. So we'll see how he performs when he is in there. And then next year is going to be the year that they're probably relying on him to be a full-time, big-time starter in the NFL, regardless of what happens, right? So I'm very intrigued to see how this plays out. I'm interested to see, does he get more time at left tackle or right guard? I'm interested to see if Sean Ryan or Rasheed Walker just make that spot theirs, like Rasheed Walker basically did a season ago. And also interested to see how Anthony Belton gets involved, or if he gets involved in that conversation, and or Jacob Monk or anyone else that has every right to get involved in that conversation as well. The great news is, on the surface right now, it looks like Green Bay has legitimate depth along the offensive line, and that is a luxury in the NFL. Most teams don't have 5 solid starters. Green Bay might have 7. And again, if Belton and Morgan are as advertised, right? So I again, am very happy with where Green Bay's at from an offensive line standpoint, and let the competition start. And I quite frankly, as long as you get those 2 spots right, I don't really care if it's Walker or Morgan or Belton or Sean Ryan. I'm sure Green Bay would love, beyond love, if Morgan and Belton just stepped up and were amazing and took that left tackle and right guard spots, because they have them under contract for long. But right now you have the benefit of having all those guys under contract, and you can let them go out and compete. Like I said, I think that's one of the more intriguing battles of training camp and of this offseason. Any DBs have an edge for the last couple spots based on what you've seen so far? Nothing yet, but Keyshawn Nixon did give Kamal Hadden quite a bit of praise the other day and said that he's been tearing it up and that he's been excellent. So some real legitimate praise from Kamal Hadden. I do think Hadden's going to have a real chance to make this team. It just depends on how many spots are available. I could see anywhere between 1 to 3, depending on if Jair Alexander's back or not. But I think it's going to come down to Hadden, Micah Robinson, Kalen King, and then we'll see if anyone else can kind of get involved in that conversation. But I think those 3 are probably the primary ones, that you're looking at in that situation. And then it just comes out to kind of who performs better throughout the course of camp, preseason, etc. But I would seem like Kamal Hadden maybe has a little bit of a leg up right now, just based on what we heard from Keyshawn Nixon. But I am very interested in Micah Robinson. He had that great pass breakup in the OTAs from week 1, and we'll see if he can kind of carry that over moving forward. But I think that should be a very interesting. Are actually available there. I have not heard a single word out of Covington other than his press conference. So one of the tough things of the defensive line is, I've talked about this in the past, you're on the sidelines as a media member, and the offensive line is right by you. The tight ends are right by you. You can sometimes get a little bit of work with the linebackers down towards the end too, that they're by you. The safeties are kind of like in the middle of the field. The wide receivers are usually way over. The offensive line's way over. And then you've got the defensive line way down at the end, and the edge rushers way down at the end that you really have no access to. So those are the toughest ones to be able to video or to actually hear what's going on or see what's going on when they're doing their individual work. So outside of Covington and his little press conference that he did, I have not had the opportunity to hear him coach or anything like that. I thought the press conference that he did was impressive, but outside of that, haven't had the opportunity to really interact or see anything else from DeMarcus Covington. Would you rather relive and deal with the Rodgers Packers drama every year for the next 25 years, or the Jair drama plus in-season injuries every year for the rest of your life? I don't know. I guess at least Rodgers is playing in that situation where Jair is not. So if you're just telling me like it's just one of those players, I don't know. Maybe Jair, because I want a little bit more stability at quarterback, I guess, in that situation. So I guess I'll take the Jair drama. The Jair drama hasn't been that horrible, quite frankly. And it just outside of, there's been a lot of discussion about it. And you can still put a really good team out there. It would be frustrating that you're putting salary cap into that, but you're putting salary cap into the quarterback as well. So I guess I'll take the Jair situation in that world. Aaron Rodgers, week 8, the last Green Bay victory in Pittsburgh against the Steelers was on November 23rd, 1941. Is that real? Can A-Rod extend the streak? Yeah, it's, again, I think there's a lot of drama in that game. I'm very intrigued by it. Seems Packer fans are a lot more excited about a restructured deal than Jair is, apparently. Still nothing. Good news is Green Bay has leverage, no guaranteed money due before the season starts. Your move, Jair. Yeah, still have no idea how this thing plays out. As I've talked about before, I think we would all love this to be done from a fan standpoint, but the Packers don't care. And I do think that patience usually pays off more often than not from a Brian Gutekunst standpoint. I am interested to see if next week serves as some sort of deadline. Jair planning to show up at minicamp. The Packers cannot have him practice unless this thing is resolved. The most interesting aspect would be if Jair just practices next week. If that's it, like he's just back. Like they're willing to say, all right, you're back on your contract as is. I think that's by far and away the least likely scenario, but that would be the most interesting. I think maybe the most likely is that he shows up and Green Bay just says, you're not practicing because we can't have you practice. We'll pay you for being here, that it's not not a fine or anything like that. And we'll give you your roster bonuses for coming to the workouts and whatever, but we can't have you practicing. And then they still continue to work towards a resolution moving forward. Of course, there's always the pathway to a resolution where they figure out a restructured contract or a trade or a release or whatever that might look like. There's a lot that could happen. I was wondering if maybe before mini camps next week, could we get a Friday news dump today? I'm not expecting it, but this would be the last Friday news dump before mini camps next week. Again, don't think it's going to happen, but maybe not entirely out of the realm of possibility. So I'm just very interested to see what this looks like. I do think the Packers are probably more in the driver's seat here, but Jair is in an interesting spot as well. And we'll see if he comes in and maybe tries to get this thing going a little bit sooner rather than later, which I'm sure he and his agent would love to have done at some point in time. All right, Jay Money, yes, we are live. I'm going to come back here. 1:31 was our question time. I want to get to a couple of these super chats really quick. How will the Packers defense adjust if they regress? Yeah, I think that's the beauty of Jeff Hafley. There could easily be regression. There could be things that they do better. There could be things that they do worse. Players that look better, players that look worse. I think the thing that I love about Jeff Hafley is his adaptability. He's not going into any season just saying, hey, we're going to do the same things that we did last year. He's not going into any game feeling that same way. He's going to have a game plan in particular for each individual game based on what players that he has available, what team he's going against, and he will adapt based on what Green Bay does better or worse. This was a team last year that you could tell was expecting that Kenny Clark and Rashawn Gary, LVN, Devontae Wyatt, Preston Smith, and the rest of that group was going to be able to get home with 4, and they were going to be able to do a lot of great coverage stuff on the back end. You could tell it was also a team that was expecting to have Jair Alexander out there utilized as a top cover corner on some of these really good wide receivers. They didn't really get either of those things. They didn't get pressure with 4, and they lost their best cover corner. And Jeff Hafley still found a way to make it a top 10 defense in almost any way that you possibly want to measure it. So if something else happens where they have, they have to call an audible or things just don't go according to plan, my biggest, thing with Jeff Hafley that I love, the biggest attribute is that he has the ability to adjust and find new ways to attack teams and different ways to go about winning on defense. That's why I'm excited about Jeff Hafley. It was why I was excited from day one of his press conference. A lot of people heard more pressure and cover one and man coverage and those sort of things. The thing I heard from day one was adaptability, and we saw it on full display this past year. So if it is a little bit worse in certain areas than they're expecting, I have full faith that Jeff Hafley will be able to find a way to adapt to that. And, if that even just equates to the 14th best defense rather than a top 10 or whatever that might be, then there's going to have to be a little bit more heavy lifting on the offense and special teams to make up for it. And hopefully those two sides are capable of doing that. Aiden, thank you for the super chat. It's my birthday. Didn't get to hear your thoughts on Rodgers versus Love on Sunday Night Football Week 8. Also, if we were looking for a wide receiver, is Golden the guy? Wide receiver 1 is Golden the guy right now. Well, Aiden, first of all, happy birthday to you, my friend. Hope you are having a unbelievably tremendous day. And shout out to you. I'd love to, I can't tell from the picture how old you're turning, but whatever it is, again, hope that you are enjoying your best version of life. As far as Rodgers Love, cannot wait for it in week 8. Obviously had the Rodgers episode today if you want to check that out. But just that matchup in particular, it's always one of those things where, yes, it's Rodgers versus Love, but they're, of course, not on the field at the same time. So it is, but it isn't. But I still think both of those guys are going to want to play. We know Aaron's going to want to play his best game of the season against Green Bay. There's no question about that. And we know that Jordan is going to have a little bit of extra motivation to show that the Packers made the right decision, that he's the guy in Green Bay, and that he can kind of take that, take the mantle from Aaron and now officially kind of be the guy, even though we already know he's the guy in Green Bay. So I think they're both going to be amped up, excited, ready to play in that game. And hopefully we just get an old-fashioned gunslinger shootout and Rodgers goes, we can make the argument it'd be better if, Rodgers went for 50 yards and 5 interceptions, but it would certainly be more entertaining if we got a old classic gunslinger shootout between Love and Rodgers, and of course Love coming out on top of that one. As far as wide receiver 1 and Golden being the guy, I would be hesitant to put too much too fast on his plate. I think he has every right to be that at some point in time, whether that's in 2025 or beyond. I don't know. I think we kind of take one step at a time, see where he fits in within this offense, see if he can get significant snaps, and then what he does with those. We're still in OTAs. He looks the part. I could not be more excited from what I've seen from Golden so far. But let's kind of take it one step at a time, see what he can be, see what he can do. And then again, I'm still not entirely sold that this team needs a true number one, but they do need players to step up in the clutch when they need them and to be a deep downfield threat. And I think Golden can give them both of those things, but whether that's in 2025, 26, 27, whenever that might be, we'll have to kind of wait and see, but he has every right to take that mantle whenever he wants to. It just probably takes a little bit of time transitioning from college into the NFL. And again, don't know that we need to place that number one moniker on him right away. Let's let him go out and compete, and let's see who steps up and kind of takes that, whoever it might be, whether it's Dobbs or Reed or Wicks or Watson down the road or Golden right now. I don't really care, but it would be nice if somebody stepped up and said, yeah, I'm the guy. And maybe that is Matthew Golden, and maybe that is this year, but kind of more willing to take it one step at a time. Let's see. What do you think? What do you think gets announced first, Jair news or Elgton news? It just depends on what news is, right? You know, there's a good chance that Elgton is still upset, but that he's at practice next week and it's not exactly resolved, but he's there because it's mandatory minicamp. That could be one thing. Or he's just sitting out of practice. That could be another thing as well. So we might get news on Elgton earlier, but I would think the Elgton thing is probably easier to resolve, but I think that the Jair thing has been working for months now. So maybe you have just a leg up on it in that standpoint. I'll say Jair gets resolved first, but we might get Elgton news sooner than we get Jair news. LeBron, Brady, Manning, and Ronaldo, only athletes to beat Father Time. Ronaldo, certainly. Manning beat it-ish. Like, Manning was clearly, like, he couldn't throw the ball at times. Like, he just had nothing behind it. But his mind was so sharp, and he knew where to go with the ball, and he could just get just barely enough behind it on some of those, like, 30, 40-yard passes that it was still effective. And, like, he was obviously still able to win a Super Bowl late in his career. But Father Time clearly affected him in a major way. From a physical standpoint, just his mental standpoint was so much higher that he was able to pull it off. Ronaldo, Brady, LeBron, unequivocally so. Like, they're unbelievable. It's not fair. Messi, I would still put in that category as well. I bet the Packers think Elgton is being paid plenty. Could the Packers move on from Elgton? I spent some time thinking about this the other day, Dennis, of like, what if? Not expecting it, not really wanting to go down that rabbit hole entirely, but just spending some time thinking about it because I spend time thinking about all of these things. I just don't think so. The biggest reason why is I don't know who you have play center. I think Sean Ryan can play center. I don't think you want him as your full-time center all season long. And no, I don't think you move Zach Tom inside. I mean, you could, if you got a good deal for Elgton Jenkins from some other team, you probably theoretically could go with Rasheed at left tackle, with Banks at left guard, with Tom at center, with Ryan at right guard, and then just let Belton and Morgan fight it out at right tackle. You probably could do that. I just don't think they want to go in that direction. So I think it'll get resolved. I'm not super concerned about it at the moment, but we'll take it a day at a time and see if it gets worse before it gets better. But I think they just figure something out. I don't think it's going to be anything crazy. And hopefully by the time training camp rolls along, those guys are in good place. And, it just is figured out by that point in time. All right. Steelers are the most terrifying 9-8 teams ever. Yeah. You never know what you're going to get week in and week out. And they're always going to battle you. Their defense is always going to be good. They're going to be well coached. They're going to take care of the football. They rarely turn it over. Aaron is a really good fit from that standpoint, in that it's just a team that always wins the turnover battle. So yeah, they're not an easy team to play. Don't care what their talent level is. Tomlin's always got them coached up well. And I think it's always going to be a difficult game when you're going against Tomlin and the Steelers, specifically in Pittsburgh. Out of all the practices, training camps, and OTAs you have been, what are some of the best moments that you have seen? Oh man, that's a really great question, J Money. Trying to think if I remember like any sort of specific training camp moment that sticks out to me more than anything else. I think I just have sort of a mindset of just kind of taking all of that stuff with some level of grain of salt, that I don't put too much stock into almost anything that I see in camp or anything like that. I'll give you a couple answers, which J Money might not be exactly what you're looking for, but just some things that stand out to me in general of thinking back on this a little bit. Um, First of all, growing up as a kid, like seeing Reggie White and just some of these players live and at camp and going down and having, players sign autographs for you and, riding the bikes and things like that. That to me will always be iconic. It's such an unbelievable aspect of being a Packers fan. I think it was better back in the day before it was a little bit more corporate and before they didn't, give you quite the access to the players that they used to and things like that. But still really unbelievable. I will say the day that Aaron went on his, vengeance press conference, right? The airing of grievances after he requested a trade, didn't get it, wanted to come back, but wanted Randall Cobb there with him. So they trade for Randall Cobb and all of that stuff. And being in that press conference room when Aaron aired those grievances for what was it, like an hour? That was surreal. But I've talked about this in the past, and I'm talking to, I think, Marcus Eversole on the sidelines about that this week as well. The craziest thing about that entire situation is Aaron went full like nuclear for like an hour, just aired every grievances that he wanted to air, or grievance that he wanted to air. And it was literally just like releasing everything. From that press conference to like 45 minutes later, being out on the practice field, it almost was like he just needed to get that out of his system. And once he did, everything was good. Like if you would have said from the time the previous season had ended up until the time that Jordan took the field on the practice field that day, if you were in a coma for that entire time, you didn't know anything happened, that there was this trade request or that there was this back and forth and the Packers and Rodgers were fighting all offseason and Rodgers went full nuclear in that press conference. If you had been in a coma that entire time, you would have thought that nothing had happened, that Rodgers was back, excited as ever, out on the field with his teammates, that there was no drama whatsoever. And really from the point that he took the practice field through the rest of that season, there was nothing. There was no drama, no anything. So to go from that drama-filled offseason to this unbelievable press conference that he just said everything, to being as cool and calm and collected and everything's great and groovy out on the field 45 minutes later, I don't even know how to explain it. So that was something that was really surreal. And then what I've always talked about as well is not necessarily a player a play or a moment or anything like that, but I'll always remember some of the players and how they went about attacking practices. Aaron Rodgers, David Bakhtiari, Jair Alexander, Devontae Adams, some of these players that are just the best of the best that you got to see in the prime of their career and really see how they attack practices. And Bakhtiari and Adams in particular were two that just went about it in a really unbelievable way. And I will always remember the time, effort, and energy that they put into it, how much care, specifically with Bakhtiari mentoring teammates as well. Just some really awesome stuff. So those will be the things that I kind of remember. But I'm sure if I had more time to think about it, I could probably think of some moments and stuff like that too. But definitely those are some of the things that stand out over the years. Only guy the Packers should be worried about signing is Zach Tom, one of the many who actually earns his keep, best Green Bay offensive lineman for the past 3 seasons. That's the one I think everyone expects them to prioritize, and I think they'll prioritize it as well. I think the fact that Zach Tom is at OTAs and practicing as well, not having this big contract dispute, just again goes to show you even more that he cares about it, that he's a consummate Packer and professional. And I think they will reward him with a big contract, but that does seem to be the one. I think there are going to be others as well that they definitely want to keep, but probably depends on the price tag a little bit. Can they move on from some of those? Yes, but I don't think you could have a mass exodus either. So there'll be others that they prioritize, but probably none as much as Zach Tom. Do I think Aaron Banks and Nate Hobbs can have similar impact production as Jacobs and McKinney last year? No. That's a tough bar to clear, right? Jacobs and McKinney were the 2 best players on the team last year, and I don't think it was particularly close. I don't think Aaron Banks can be the best player in offense, and I don't think Nate Hobbs can be the best player on defense. That's like I said, that's a very tough bar to clear. But I was thinking about this the other day. I might do an episode on something like this coming up, and just throwing some ideas around of like looking at other championship contenders and championship teams and how they kind of built it and how they were able to, be in that contention. I was just looking at like the Oklahoma City Thunder, and obviously they're down 1-0 at this point right now. I still expect them to win the series, but definitely think the Pacers are going to very much have a say in that. But look at their last like two big acquisitions. It wasn't adding a third superstar to the team. It wasn't adding some big money for like top of the market free agent or whatever. It was Isaiah Hartenstein, and then it was Alex Caruso. Those were their last big two that they added to that roster. And I look at Nate Hobbs and Aaron Banks, and I look at it as something similar. It wasn't like they went out and got this next big superstar on their roster, but they got two guys that are going to be, I think, very paramount to the success of the Green Bay Packers this year. You have a very good starting left guard and what I think is going to be a really good starting defensive back, playing a little bit on the outside, probably primarily in the slot when given opportunities on obvious passing downs. I think both of those guys can get Green Bay hopefully over the hump. I don't know that they're going to be, again, the superstars that make it so that they win it, but I do think that they can be key cogs in what is hopefully a very talented team this upcoming year. So I'd look at it as more, supplemental pieces like a Hartenstein and a Alex Caruso in OKC, more than what we saw Green Bay go and get in Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney a season ago. Happy Friday to you as well, Will. Thanks so much for being here. Jordan Love versus Aaron Rodgers is giving Brett Favre versus Aaron Rodgers. Yeah, very much so. Totally agree. Student versus teacher. If Rasheed Walker walks, pun intended, would you resign Yash Nyman? Also, subnote, we didn't use enough Walker walk puns in his or Quay's tenure with the Packers. Fair enough. No, I would have no interest in bringing back Yash. I think you just go in a different direction. I think they have players that can take the spot in Jordan Morgan and Anthony Belton, Zach Tom, etc. I think you go with those guys and then you continue to draft and develop at the position. If they want to do like a Yash Nyman, 1 year vet minimum towards the end of camp, like they did with like an Andre Dillard or something like that, I'm always for those deals. Like the more depth that you can have, the better, but not in any sort of main, roster situation or anything like that. All right. Let's see. The dream of the Packers snatching away Aaron's second Lombardi is still alive. Packers over Steelers in the Super Bowl. I thought about this of just like, it's never going to happen, but just for funsies, can you imagine, can you just imagine for a moment a Packers Steelers Super Bowl? Like you just never really get those scenarios. It doesn't feel like too often. But this would be one that would be beyond epic. They're both like, I wonder what current Super Bowl odds are. All right. So that was May 19th. I have to check the current ones because they obviously have changed since Rodgers has become a Steeler. All right. So the Packers are plus 2,100. The Steelers are plus 4,300. So that would be a pretty unlikely matchup just from a betting standpoint. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The Packers are tied for 8th with the Commanders in Super Bowl odds. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19th. The Steelers are the 19th most likely Super Bowl winner. So you're looking at like the 8th and 19th best Super Bowl odds that would have to go against each other in the Super Bowl. So again, extremely unlikely, but man, would that be one hell of a game if that ended up happening that way. If you had to guess, is McKinney a Packer for life, or is he a typical Packers fan where he signs a 4-year deal and gets cut after 3? I don't think you mean fan there, Chicken, but I know what you mean. I think he lives out the 4 years of the deal, but I bet he ends up playing for another team at some point. I bet he doesn't finish his career in Green Bay, but I could easily see him playing 5-6 years more in Green Bay. So I think he at least finishes that deal and maybe plays even a little bit beyond it. But I don't think he plays his final snap as a Green Bay Packer. We may be able to see Jair versus Rodgers week 8 if they are both playing and healthy. Do you think Rodgers throws in his direction? Oh, yeah, absolutely. I don't think Rodgers is ever going to shy away. I know he shied away from Richard Sherman a little bit, but they kind of did that by design by putting Jarrett Boykin over there and saying, all right, you can cover our worst guy and we'll just try to win elsewhere. But outside of that, I don't think Rodgers is ever too afraid of anyone. And I'm sure he would love to throw at Jair a couple different times just to test it out. But if we do get it, yeah, I do think he'll throw at Jair a couple times at least. This will work well. I don't like the Steelers or Rodgers. There you go. And that's what I mentioned yesterday. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on, right? And I don't mean that as a political aisle. I mean that as a Rodgers aisle, whether you're pro or anti-Aaron or whatever the case may be, or want to cheer for him or against him. You have the opportunity to do that now. If you are cheering for him, then you will have every right to do so in a lot of games outside of the Packers game. And if you're cheering against him, you have 17 more games to do that at least. And if not, if you're neither of those things, well, again, I think it's still better for football that he's quarterbacking the Steelers than, Will Howard or, Mason Rudolph in that situation. So I think it's good all the way around. Do you think Kamal Hadden can be as good as Rasul Douglas, but also be able to stay with the Packers long term? Yes, but when you're an undrafted free agent that is at the bottom of the roster, I mean, your first thing is just make the 53. Rasul had a couple really nice years in Green Bay. That's tough. Most undrafted he's not an undrafted free agent. He's a 6th-round guy that came over to Green Bay. You get my point. Like, most of these guys that are fringe roster guys are just fighting to stay around for as long as they possibly can. If Kamal hadn't turned into Rasul Douglas, that would be an unbelievable accomplishment. But yes, if they discovered this guy, I mean, you have to remember Hadden is much younger coming to Green Bay than what Rasul Douglas was at the time. So if they discover this, hidden gem, diamond in the rough, and they're the team that kind of not only discovers it, but like gets him to that point, yeah, there's absolutely a much better chance that they keep him around. Remember, they did extend Rasul too. It's just that extension did not really coincide with a open window for Green Bay. So they traded him for a pick, got some salary cap savings, and it was the right thing to do. So yeah, I think Hadden, if he did get to that point, would be somebody that they would try to keep around, but he's going to have to get to that point first. Possible, yes. Likely, no. But he's talented, and I'm excited to see what he can bring to Green Bay. And if Nixon's right, maybe they did find a diamond in the rough. But like I said, let's see if he can make the 53 first before we get too far ahead of ourselves. The Elgton Jenkins situation is interesting. As you said, 17 alignment on this roster. Ryan and Monk might be alternates. Aging veteran, 30 soon. Is he worth more money or to be extended further? Yeah, I still think they just figure something out. I'm not super stressed about this yet. I think he's going to be the Packers center this upcoming year. I'd be pretty stunned if he wasn't. They probably give him a little bit of a kickback and then kind of have to make a decision on it next year. And hopefully everything's good with it and it works out great. But right now, I'm not super concerned that Elgton is not going to be the center this upcoming season. It just makes too much sense for him to be the center. And I just don't see him going anywhere else. So Favre, when they're NFC North, Rodgers went Jets, then AFC North, Jordan Love goes Jets, then where? Oh, sorry. So Favre went NFC North after the Jets. Rodgers went AFC North after the Jets. Jordan Love just stays in the NFC North and stays with the Green Bay Packers and retires a Packer and rides out on top with 17 Super Bowl victories. That's the hope, chicken. I don't know. We'll see. History has a weird way of repeating itself. Hopefully it does this year, where Rodgers was in his 6th season, as we saw at Zach Cruz post, which he, I think, took from Reddit. 6th season, 30 years as starter, 27 years old. Rodgers won a Super Bowl. Same with Favre. Hopefully it's the same with Jordan this year. Imagine the Packers versus Steelers is as good as that Chiefs versus Rams game from a few years ago. Instant classic. I mean, I don't care what game it is. Like, you can sign me up for as many of those as you want. Like, I will take, as many shootouts and just epic games. I don't really care who's playing at that point. But yeah, if it was Rodgers versus the Packers and it ended up that way, it would definitely be a version of special. Jacob Monk needs to take a big step ahead this season. I mean, depends on what your expectations are. He was like a 5th-round pick last year, right? He's got a good chance to make the roster no matter what. If you want more depth, or if you think that he needs to become a starter, then yes, he needs to take that big step forward. I would love every player on this team to take a big step forward. I think every player on this team needs to take a big step forward. I don't know that Monk is necessarily in jeopardy. It's great that he's already getting some time with the ones just to get acclimated with that a little bit and get some opportunities, but he'll have a really good chance of making the roster no matter what. And it just is more dependent upon, is he a top backup on game days? Does he get involved in the starting competition? Or does he more have to like earn his job at the end of the year? But I don't know that Jacob Monk for me is at top of mind right now for players that I would like to see step up in a major way this offseason. But if he does, great for him, great for the Packers. But I could think of probably about 50 Packers I would rather have step up in a major way before I would probably get to Jacob Monk. The Packers want to move on next year, and Elgton is making it difficult. Yeah, again, I would not. We don't know the full story yet with Elgton. We know that there's some level of frustration. We're only talking about non-mandatory OTAs so far. Let's see what next week brings. If he doesn't show up next week, or if there's a lot of drama next week, that's a little bit different. But for now, I'm not holding out anything at this point until we see what happens next week and maybe get a little bit more to the story before I'm willing to jump to any conclusions. As a lifelong Packers fan, Rodgers is my favorite player of all time, and I'm a huge Love fan. I'm very glad Rodgers is going to play this season. Yeah, I totally get that. I mean, a lot of people, for me, obviously, my formative Packers years and just formative years in life were dictated by Brett Favre. And, I was so excited when he went, when I knew he wasn't going to be a Packer anymore, and I was ready to move into the Rodgers era. But I was so excited when he got to play for the Jets, especially because the Packers would get a better draft pick the better that the Jets played that year. So it was like having two teams. It really was. It was like getting to see Brett play and cheering on the Jets that year. The better the Jets did, the better draft pick the Packers would get. Plus, you got to cheer on Rodgers and the Packers in his first year. It was heaven. It was awesome. And then obviously it changed when he went to Minnesota, and that definitely, soured some things. And then obviously some of the stuff off the field later. But at the time it was awesome. And you don't want to give up that relationship with a player that, again, was so important during the years that you learned to love football and learned to love the Packers. So I get it entirely. And I think it ends up in a perfect spot with Pittsburgh where you can still cheer for him if you are a Rodgers fan. So again, I don't think it could have ended up much better, regardless of, again, what you feel of Rodgers. It's a perfect place for him to end up. He has 2 years left on his deal. No reason for him to pull this. See, I guess I totally disagree. SDN 40. This is not some, idealistic, just perfect world that we live in where everything works this way. If the Packers wanted to cut Elgton Jenkins today, they could. And next year they are in the exact same situation. So I guess if Elgton doesn't have a right to sit out, the Packers don't have the right to, not give Jair his contract that he is set to make this year. They shouldn't be trying to trade him. They shouldn't be trying to cut him or, renegotiate the contract. They signed a contract. They should be honoring it this year, and Jair should be able to play that out. It doesn't work that way. If Elgton Jenkins, if you want to look at it the opposite way, then Elgton Jenkins should be there at practice and doing everything. It doesn't work that way. We are not in some idealistic world where these things work out exactly perfect the way that you would want them to every single time. These are contracts that are negotiated, fought for every single time. And these are things that the player has to look out for what's best for himself. And the Packers have to look at what's best for them. And these things are going to happen. They're going to continue to happen. They're going to happen from now until the end of football, or the end of time probably. And you just have to kind of get used to it a little bit. And I get it. It feels like, mom and dad are fighting sometimes and you just wish they would get along and everything would be this perfect harmony, but just doesn't work that way. Let's just see what happens when, training camp and mini camps rolls around. Again, he has missed 2 non-mandatory OTAs, and we don't have a full story yet on exactly what Elgton's plan is or what he's looking for. So I wouldn't jump to any conclusions. And even if Elgton is just, I want more money, I want more, security for next year, he has every right to be able to do so. And the Packers have the ability to fine him next week if he's not at minicamp. These are just the things that you have to deal with in the modern NFL with the way that contracts are structured. If every contract was just set to be honored by both sides, then yeah, we wouldn't have these situations. But teams are going to get out of contracts early by releasing players and not paying them the money that they're owed. And players are going to use every avenue that they can to get the most that they can when they are deserved it or they feel like they are owed it. And these are just, again, things that are going to continue to happen. So I don't think it's fair to vilify the franchise when they have to try to do what's best for themselves. And I don't think it's fair to vilify the player when they are doing everything that they can to do what's best for themselves. This is a business through and through. The players are a entity that get paid huge chunks of money based on what they do out on the field, and they have to look out for themselves. And I'm not saying that this is I'm not, pro all these millions of dollars. I get that there are real people that are fighting just to, put food on the table and things like that. So I get that this is a different world that these players and teams live in, but we just have to sort of accept that too. Life is not fair. Life is not set up for this perfect, harmonious situation either. And we are tasked with, or at least I'm tasked with talking about football and $1 million contracts. So I get it. And what ends up happening is you're arguing over whether these $1 billion teams should have the money or whether the $1 million players should have the money. More often than not, I'm siding with the players on that. But again, I think that both parties have to do what's in the best interest for themselves. I'm never going to fault a player for trying to get as much as they can. And I'm never going to fault a team for trying to do what's in the best interest of them and the organization, because that's what Brian Gutekunst and the front offices are paid to do. It's a cutthroat business. It's not show friends, it's show business, and you've got to be cutthroat when it comes to that stuff. So I am not against Elgton for doing it. And again, we don't know the full story yet either. So I would just let it play out and see where it goes. And then we can maybe make a little bit more judgment down the road. But I understand it. I get it. These players only have a finite amount of time where they can get paid for this stuff. I understand that why Elgton would want to go in the direction that he's going in right now. Aaron Rodgers is like Shakespeare if he was a Hall of Fame quarterback. That's very well said, Jay Money. All right, I got about 5-6 minutes left. So after this question from Adam, I'm just going to probably get to some member chats after this. And if you want to get some super chats in, feel free to do that as well. Jenkins will be the center for 2025 and possibly for 2026. With Jenkins' age and desired salary, I could see the Packers cutting ties with Elgton after 2025, re-signing Sean Ryan and moving him to center. Yeah, I'm not ready to say that Ryan would be moved to center yet, but if they felt he could do it, that's certainly the possibility. And this is exactly why I'm talking about what I'm talking about with Elgton. The Packers have every right to release Elgton outright next year and not pay him a single dime of the money, the $20 million that's owed to him next year. It's a pretty nice situation for the Packers to be in. If you're Elgton, you're probably a little bit worried about that, thinking, hey, you want me to move to center, a position where I might get less money on the open market next year. I have no guarantees that you're going to keep me next year. And I would like to be compensated so that I know what my future looks like. I'm out here battling and you can just cut me next year. Can we find a way to change that? And it's not like he's saying he doesn't want to be a Packer. It's not like he's saying anything like that. So I can understand why Elgton is worried about that situation next year because he's watching Jair go through it right now as we speak. So yeah, I'm not sure that Jenkins is the full-time answer at center. Not saying he can't be. Not saying I would necessarily go in that direction though either. But yes, they right now have the ability to get out of that Elgton Jenkins contract in 2026, which is why we're in the contract situation that we likely are in with Elgton in 2025. All right, John, regarding the draft lottery, the most fair way would be for a lottery to decide the first pick only for teams who are tied. So 3, 6, and 11 teams get a mini lottery for who picks first. Won't make great TV though. Yeah, again, I've talked about it. I am not necessarily opposed to a draft lottery. I think it would be must-watch TV when it comes to that. And I do think it's beneficial to the Packers because they're usually not a team that is in the bottom 3 to 5 teams. So yeah, if you can do that, I think there's some added value there. I'm not necessarily a proponent of it in the fact that the system as is working. So I don't know that you necessarily need to change anything. And if it's not broken, maybe don't try to fix it. I'm probably a little bit more in that category, but I would probably be one if they did a draft lottery. I'd be like, all right, this is kind of kick ass. And I kind of want to see how it works. The other thing that I have thought of in the past, both for the NBA and the NFL, if the NFL did go to a draft lottery, don't base it on your most recent season. Let me explain. If you're basing it on the most recent season, you're still giving the team with the worst record better odds to win the lottery. And there's still going to potentially be some level of tanking. And if that's what you're trying to do and trying to avoid, then I don't think that that's necessarily the case. What I would do, let me just pull this up here. All right. So, for example, what I would do, and I would do this in the NBA as well, make it so that the team with the best lottery odds, and don't make it by a ton. Don't make it by a ton. The team with the best lottery odds is the team that has had the longest playoff drought. So, for example, the New York Jets have gone 14 years without making it to the playoffs. And I think this works. Again, this makes a ton of sense in the NBA. I still think it makes sense if you went in this direction. I'm not saying they should or shouldn't, but if they did go lottery, I would base the lottery odds based off of this. The Jets have gone 14 years without making it to the playoffs. If they go another season this year and don't make the playoffs, that would be 15 years. They would have the best draft odds of anyone in the draft lottery. Second is the Carolina Panthers and the Atlanta Falcons, who have gone 7 years without making it to the playoffs. If both teams do not make the playoffs this year and make it 8 years, they would then be the second and third teams, or they would have equal odds as the second and third teams in the lottery, followed by the Colts and Bears and Saints at 4 seasons. Then the Raiders, Patriots, Cardinals, Titans with 3, the Seahawks, Jaguars, Giants, Bengals with 2, the Browns, Dolphins, Cowboys, 49ers with 1. And then obviously would continue to go from there depending on what happens this upcoming season. The reason that I like that is because you're not just incentivizing one really bad season. So for example, it doesn't necessarily make it so that if you have the, even the Dallas Mavericks scenario, right? Where they have like an off season after trading away a star, or who, like the the Warriors, for example, when they had injuries to Steph and to Clay and like everyone on the roster, right? And they get all of a sudden, I think they got picked 2 and they had another trade where they got another pick, but I think they got like picked 2 in the lottery. Now they biffed it. They screwed it up by taking Wiseman, but I digress. That's just the only reason they were there is because they had one really bad season. This would make it so that, some of those really great teams that just have one down year due to injury, we're kind of seeing it with Philadelphia right now too, with the 76ers. It doesn't necessarily reward them quite as much. So, and then what you can do there as well is it also makes it so that you're not necessarily incentivized in tanking unless you're like the Jets, right? Where there's a little bit more incentive. But what you get to is you're still trying to make the playoffs. You're still trying to win games at the end of the year, because unless you have the ability to make the playoffs, winning games or losing games doesn't change your odds from a draft lottery standpoint. And on top of that, if you even if you were in that tanking mindset, like if you're the Jets, right? And let's say you get to that very end of the season and you're like a 9-7 team. And if you win your last game, you get into the playoffs. And if you lose, you're going to have the best odds to get the number 1 pick. That would be like the only scenario in which you're like maybe thinking about it. And are you really turning down an opportunity to go to the playoffs? Probably not, right? Unless there's a generational superstar in which you'd actually have to think about it. And even then, you're only getting odds on it. You're not necessarily getting the first pick. So that to me has always been a solution that I think is viable specifically for the NBA. But if the NFL went to a draft lottery system as well, don't just base it on one season, base it on the teams that have been the worst over a period of time, which I would go off of playoff droughts over anything else. Probably a stupid idea, but it's one that I think actually makes sense, at least in my mind. All right. I do have to get out of here in just a second. I just can never bring myself to dislike Aaron. I feel like I'm in the minority for that situation, though. Do you, my friend? That's awesome. I totally get it. I 1,000,000% get it. And I'm not incentivizing or saying anyone should be cheering against Aaron. I'm saying this is awesome for either side, whether you're cheering for him or against him. This is a good situation to be in with him going to Pittsburgh, AFC team, playing against the Bears and the Vikings and the Lions. Only that one game where you really have to cheer against him when he goes against the Packers. And even then, you can probably find a way to cheer for Aaron, but for a Packers win, where Aaron goes for, 350 and 5 touchdowns, but the Packers come away better with it, with Jordan Love having a better day. Do you think there's anything about the NFL that would surprise us if we go 20 years into the future? What a great channel this is. Thank you for that, Greg. I am sure there absolutely will be things that absolutely stun us, whether it's expansion, internationally, or whether it's some team that moves to a different area, whether it's a player that we never would have expected going on to have a Hall of Fame career. I'm sure there's a billion things that will probably shock us in the next 20 years. What those things might be, maybe it's a draft lottery system, who knows? But I absolutely think that there will be things that will stun us for sure, but no idea what those things might be. Pro video idea, start scouting 7-year-olds that might replace Love in 15 years. There you go. Aaron Rodgers lives rent-free in Peter Bukowski's brain. I don't think that that's true, but I understand maybe why you're tweeting it, Waller or Whalers 860, but I don't think that that's the case. I think there's a lot of things that are up in Bukowski's brain that come out from time to time, but I don't know that Rodgers is living rent-free there. I will be in town for that first week of training camp. What day would be the best to go? All of them. Get it there as much as you can. But just remember that the first couple days are going to be non-padded, and there's not going to be, they're going to be shorter to begin with. They kind of ramp it up, but all of those should be good days to go. All right. Neo, which Packers pass catchers will emerge as the red zone threats? I'm hoping that we see Musgrave and Kraft. But I also think when Watson comes back, he can be that. And I think Dobbs continues to be a red zone threat as well. Matt Fralick coming in huge with 5 memberships. Thanks so much for that, Matt. Happy hour to those 5 new members. You're the best, Matt. Appreciate you a ton. And then 5 from Carla as well, coming in with 5 more. Appreciate you guys. That is awesome. And hopefully some really cool people got some really cool memberships there. Shout out Carla. Thank you, Carla, from Anton, and happy hour from Carla. All right, last but not least, before I get out of here, where is A-Rod in your all-time quarterback ranks? I still think that it is between Mahomes and Rodgers. If you just take all the quarterbacks of all time, when they're at their absolute best, no questions about it, like their best, I think Mahomes and Rodgers are still, to me, the top 2. I think Josh Allen and Tom Brady certainly in that conversation as well. I think Brady's the all-time great over the longevity of it and what he did in his career. I think he is still the best quarterback career of all time. I think, again, if you just took one game in their prime at their absolute best, I think it's between Rodgers and Mahomes. I think the criteria matters, but I still think Rodgers is in the top 10 for sure, probably top 5, but I think it gets a little bit more debatable within that top 10, but definitely in the top 10 for sure. All right, friends, I do have to get out of here. I appreciate you a ton. Thank you so much for being here. I'll be back next week. We might do some mini camp live stuff. We'll see how that goes. Definitely members Q&A. I think that might take place on Monday next week, and then definitely happy hour next Friday as well. I'll see you guys all very, very soon. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go. Enjoy your weekend as well.